All right, Shabbos, say good morning. Let us begin. Start by thanking our sponsors, our Talmud Torah sponsors for the month of Cheshvan, Yoel and Sarah Kelman, in appreciation for all of the learning and the shiurim. We thank the Kelmans very much for their sponsorship. We also dedicate our learning in the Zechus of Refuah for Aviva Bas Shena Chana and for Rachel Yehudis Bas Tova Gittel. But also with that, let us begin. So we have an incredible daf ahead of us today. We are picking up at today's daf is Peches 88. I believe we left off yesterday at the Mishnah. Is that correct, Gustara? I think that's where we left off yesterday. So we'll say a lot to do. Interesting sugyas today. So we'll say, here we go. Says the Mishnah. So the Mishnah pays Zainam days 87b. Gustara shehi lamala min hamayim. So we'll say again, remember, we've been dealing with this case extensively over the last number of days. A balcony. I have a balcony that extends over the water. The only way for me to draw water from that balcony, so remember again, we're familiar with the issue. Water, in this particular case, is considered to be a karmelis. The balcony is a rishus hayochid. Midrabanan, one is not permitted to move an item from a karmelis to rishus hayachid. So what do I do? So remember again, this is where the mechitza case comes in. So what I need to essentially create is a partition. So we'll say again, the imagery is, you can see this. This is picture 310. Although you've seen this picture many times already. So we'll say in picture 310. So essentially what I'm doing is I am making a hole in my gustara that is dalid by dalid, 4 tfachim by 4 tfachim. And I'm creating a mechitza, in this case, a wall. But essentially what it looks like is you're creating a box. You're creating a box. And the way we view it is that halacha l'maisa, that box extends downwards. We view that box as extending downwards into the water, essentially creating a mechitza between the gustara and the water, allowing you to draw water through that mechitza. Now, what does that do, Rabbi? Since we view the mechitza as extending down into the water, so effectively then you're not drawing water from a karmelis into a rishus hayachid. Rather, the entire thing is treated like a rishus hayachid. Now, what's interesting is what the Mishnah introduces here is that if you notice in picture 310, so that box, which was really a mechitza, could be either below the gustara, which is the right-hand side picture, that's kind of what we've been operating until now, or could even be placed on top of the gustara, the left-hand picture as well. It doesn't really matter. Either way, what we view is the walls of that box extending all the way down to the water, allowing you to draw water through a rishus hayochid. So the Gemara goes weiter. Similarly, again, if you have two balconies, one on top of the other. Now we'll see what that means in just take a look at Rashi. It's Rashi in the first of the intermediate wide lines. He says, "Afilu zu shelo keneged zu, ubevat shelo tei mufleges mikenegde b'meshach hakosel arba kedamar." So it says we're going to see. So gustara, one gustara on top of another doesn't literally have to be one directly on top of the other. They could even be across from each other. But the idea ultimately is that they should not be more than 4 tfachim away from each other. So even if you have a gustara, one on top of the other, asul le'alyona v'lo asul le'tachtona, if they made the mechitza, ultimately again for the upper balcony, but did not do so for the lower balcony, shtehan asuros, and I will say again, obviously this case presupposes that the lower balcony usually gets its water by throwing a bucket through the hole in the gustara of the top balcony. So if ultimately, again, so if they made the mechitza for the hole in the gustara of the upper balcony, but did not do so for the lower balcony, shtehen asuros ad arvu. Both balconies will be asur until a common eruv is made, a joint eruv is made. If you look at Rashi, shtehen asuros, lemalos benekev ha'alyona, neither of them could use the upper hole with the mechitza, ad arvu, until they make an eruv together. V'atachtona benekev shala ein tzarach lo mashiach sura. So interestingly enough, what this last case of Mishnah seems to be as follows: that halacha l'maisa, if you have a lower balcony and an upper balcony, and the upper balcony made the mechitzos, right? So it made not only the hole is, so remember, the hole is always there. What we're focusing on over here is the box. I'll keep calling it the box, which is the mechitza. So we'll say, so therefore again, if for Shabbos, the upper balcony has the box, the lower balcony does not, so it's clear that the lower balcony is going to be utilizing the mechitza on the top balcony. We saw this case before, right? They'd be essentially throwing the bucket up to the upper balcony and lowering it down. So that works fine. But what that would require is an eruv between lower balcony and upper balcony. And ultimately, again, if lower balcony and upper balcony do not make a joint eruv, then both balconies will be prohibited ultimately, again, from using the opening to draw water. Good. Says the Gemara. Our Mishnah does not reflect the view of Chananya ben Akavya, also who we had in yesterday's daf. Why? What did the Sanya? Chananya ben Akavya Omer. Gustra sheish ba dalar al dalar amos chokek ba dalar al dalar umemale. So let's remember again. This is Chananya ben Akavya from yesterday's daf. What did Chananya ben Akavya say? Remember, interesting shita. He held that as long as you have a gustera that is at least 4 amos by 4 amos, what do we do? You make a hole that's 4 tfachim by 4 tfachim, and what you need not create mechitzas around that hole. Why? Remember again, what does Chananya say? Kof. He holds that you could view the rest of the guster as what? As bending downwards and essentially going ahead and creating walls around that opening in the guster. So remember again, I both say, this was Chananya ben Akavya's incredible chiddush, really a double chiddush. First of all, again, that there's the concept of kof, that somehow you could view the flat area of the gustera as being bent downwards and creating walls around the opening in the gustera. And then what? And then there's good, right? Good achis. That we view the walls as extending downwards. So essentially, Chananya is allowing you to employ both of these concepts, kof and good. So the Gemara says, our Mishnah clearly doesn't reflect the view of Chananya. Why? Because our Mishnah requires you to what? To actually create mechitzos around the opening of the gustera. Right? Because according to Chananya, you don't have to create an opening. You don't have to create mechitzos because we view the rest of the gustera as bending downwards, and that's what creates the mechitzos. Our Mishnah clearly obligates you in the creation of actual mechitzos. So the Gemara says, Am Rabbi Yochanan, Mishra Rabbi Yossi ben Zimra. First of all, though, Hitter Rabbi Chananya ben Akavya Ela Biyama Shel Tiveria. So we'll say actually the Gemara Rabbi Yossi ben Zimra, Rabbi Yochanan says, the name of Rabbi Yossi ben Zimra, actually, Rabbi Chananya ben Akavya did not allow you to utilize kof and good anywhere. He just allowed this by the Sea of Tiveria. Why by the Sea of Tiveria? It has very steep banks, va'ayoros and cities, v'karfifos and karfefs, mikiva osa, all around the perimeter of the water. Aval b'shar meimos lo. But I also have other bodies of water. Chananya ben Akavya would not allow this. It's just an interesting qualifier. So what the Gemara is saying is, don't think that Rabbi Chananya ben Akavya always allows you to employ kof and good. That's not necessarily. So he mentioned this in the context of the Kinneret, of the waters of Tiberia, because essentially the waters of Tiberia, to a very large degree, are considered to be enclosed. Why are they considered to be enclosed? Again, because of the cities, because of these steep banks, and because ultimately, again, of the karfefs that's surrounded by it. But it could very well be by other bodies of water. Rabbi Chananya ben Akavya would not allow this, and would also agree with the Mishnah that if you want to draw water through the gustera, you must create a mechitza of at least 10 tfachim around the opening in the balcony. Good. So we'll say, so once we mentioned Rabbi Chananya ben Akavya, very interesting Gemara. Tan Rabbanan, Gimel Dvarim, Hitir Rabbi Chananya ben Akavya la'anshe Tiveria. Rabbi Chananya ben Akavya allowed 3 things for the people of Tiveria. Listen to this. Number 1, Mimalin Mayim Negustra b'Shabbos. Number 1, he allowed them to draw water through an opening in the balcony on Shabbos. And I will say again, we'll discuss just a moment. Number 2, Tomnin ba'atza. Number 2, you could go ahead and store fruit in the moist refuse of lentils. We'll see what that case is in just a moment. And next, umistapkin ba'alontis. And ultimately, again, you could go ahead and dry off with a towel on Shabbos. So we'll say, so what are the cases? So the Gemara says, so memalin mayim migustra b'Shabbos, that you could go ahead and fill up water on the balcony on Shabbos. So how damar? That's what we said before. That by the waters of Tiberia, so remember again, Rabbi Chananya ben Akavi allows you to go ahead and what? Allows you to go ahead and make a hole in the gustra. You need not create the mechitza because he views the entire gustra as what? Bending downwards and creating the mechitza around the hole. So that's what we mentioned before. What's the next case? What does it mean that you could go ahead and store fruit in the leftover stuff from lentils? So the Gemara says, listen to this interesting case. So the Gemara says, first of all, so look at Rashi with Tomnin. Rashi says, Perosein ba'atza, subsolas kitnis. So we'll say, atza is the leftover, not leftover, but it's the, I guess after you harvest lentils, it's like the leftover, for lack of a better term, like chaff. The leftover chaff from lentils. So what they would often do is they would store fruit in this leftover chaff from lentils. V'afapi, I'm just reading Rashi, v'afapi shalaktu min hasada b'hashkama v'atal alav. There's a lot of things happening over here. Remember, the halacha is fruit only is makabel tumah once it comes in contact with one of the zayin mashkin, one of the 7 liquids. But even then, it's only makabel tumah, receptive to tumah, if halacha lamaisa, you wanted it to become wet. But if you did not want it to become wet, it is not makabel tumah. So the interesting case Rabbi says as follows. You got up early in the morning to collect the chaff from the lentils because you want to go pack your fruit. You want to store your fruit with it. And what happens? The chaff was wet from the morning dew. So now you packed your fruit with it. Now your fruit became wet. So what's the shaila? Is your fruit makabel tuma or not? So we'll say, now watch this. That's hishkim lahavi psolas. So we'll say, if a person woke up early in the morning to get the lentil chaff, to bring it back, to pack your fruit. So we'll say, so now listen to this. In bishvil sheish alav tal, if he went early in the morning to take it, because the dew is on it, meaning you, Dafka, went early in the morning because you wanted the dew on the chaff, because the moisture is good for the preservation of the fruit. Harei hu b'chiyutan. The Nabbo say that is subject then to the pasuk of kiyutan, which means ultimately, again, the fruit is ra'ui l'kabel tumah. The fruit is fit to be makabel tumah. However, I'll say if the reason you got up early in the morning is because, again, you needed to take care of this before you went to work. So you don't really care about the moisture, don't care about the moisture. You just got up early because, again, I have to do this before I go to work. Then what? Then ultimately, again, the fruit is not makabel tumah. Ustam, we'll say, what about just a stam person? A stam person didn't have any explicit kavanah one way or the other, top of peches, and anshe Tiveria. So we'll say the people of Tiveria. People of Tiveria apparently were known as very hard workers. So we'll say, if a person has no stated intention, we assume that the reason they're getting up early and collecting the chaff early in the morning is because they need to go to work later on. They don't care about the moisture. This just happens to be the time that I have to do it. Similarly, Anshe Tiveria, who are known as very hard workers, when they would collect the chaff early in the morning, it was assumed that they were doing so in order not to miss work. Good, that was the second halacha. Third halacha, mistapkin ba'alontis. On Shabbos you could dry off with a towel. Rabbi Chananya ben Akadia said, Maihi, what's that case? The Sanya, we learn, mistabek adam ba'alontis umanicha b'chalon. So let's listen to this. A person could dry off with a towel on Shabbos, and he could leave it in the window. Now, this is very interesting. If you look at Rashi, Rashi says, mistapek ba'adam, first line, b'yom tov u'b'Shabbos imrachatz b'tzonein. So Rashi says, we were assuming over here you're dealing with cold bathing, right? A person is bathing in cold water, which technically is permitted on Shabbos. So what's the halacha? Mistabek ba'alontis, you could dry off with a towel after you bathe. Ve'in choshishin shema yischot. And we're not concerned that if we allow you to use the towel, what's going to happen? You're going to come to squeeze out the towel. Well, remember again, squeezing out a towel is a problem of malabing, is a problem of laundering on Shabbos. It's actually very important because we'll say this comes up even like a dish towel, right? You spill something and you wipe it up. You have to be very careful not to wring out that towel. That is the malacha malabing, the malacha of laundering on Shabbos. So the Brisa says over here that a person could dry off with a towel on Shabbos and put it in the window, and there's no concern that they're going to wring it out inadvertently on Shabbos. However, but you should not give it to the bathhouse attendants, because they both say bathhouse attendants are suspect that they're going to wring out the towel. Since they both say the bathhouse attendants have to go ahead and have towels ready for other people when they come in, the concern is that they will end up going ahead and wringing out towel. Shimon says, no, Shimon says you don't even have to leave the towel on the window. You could even bring the towel home in your hand, and we are not concerned that you are going to come to forget and squeeze the towel out. Good. So we'll say, so those are just so you understand the progression. Once we mentioned Rabbi Hananya ben Akavya, we just mentioned 3 other rulings of Rabbi Hananya ben Akavya. Also, not really at all. One of them happened to be this din of the guster. I will say it becomes abundantly clear, just to point this out, that Rabbi Hananya ben Akavya's unique chiddush of kof and gud, that namely you can make a 4x4 tefach opening in your gustera, and you need not create the mechitza around that opening because we view the gustera as bending down and essentially creating walls around that opening, seems to dafka have been a ruling by Tiveria, by Yamashal Tiveria, by the Kinneret, since again it was really surrounded on all sides. It was almost like an enclosed body of water. Therefore, Rabbi Hananya ben Akavya felt it was okay to be mekel regarding the gustera. Okay, Amar Barafuna, Lo Shon El Lamalos. Well, see, that actually is very interesting. Furthermore, again, I will say, when we speak about, again, using the gustera to go ahead and draw water, so this ability to draw water through a 4x4 tefach opening with a 10 tefach mechitza, or a box attached to that opening, is dafka to draw water, but it doesn't allow you to spill out wastewater. Right? I will say again, because remember, think about this, during the week, this gustera was really used for 2 things. It was used to draw water, but it was also used to go out and dispose of wastewater. So the Gemara now says you could go ahead and do that, right? Hopefully not at the same time. Right? It says you can go ahead and draw that water, right, on Shabbos, but you can't dispose of your wastewater. So Maskeflar of Shizvi, so Shizvi said as follows: V'chima ben zelu uka. So also, why is it different than a cesspool? Interesting enough, that's our next Mishnah. Our next uka means a cesspool, right? A sewer pit. So why is it different than a sewer pit, which is going to be permitted? So we'll see. Hani taimi v'hani lo taimi. I will say, so for a simple reason, the Gemara says, you know, in a cesspool, part of the way a cesspool works is the goal is that the sewage, the wastewater, get absorbed into the ground. In other words, when I pour something into a cesspool, the intention is I'm not interested in it flowing anywhere. I actually just want it to get absorbed where it is. If we look at Rashi, hasam taimi maya hamayim asum mechalos uleivala bekarka. When you pour it into a cesspool, the goal is that the sewage, right, that the wastewater get absorbed into the ground. Hilchach ki shafech adaita delibalu b'duchtayu kashafa. So we're going to see when you pour wastewater into a cesspool, your intention is that it get absorbed right there. The Gemara says, "V'inafki labar," and if the waste from the cesspool happens to flow out into a rishus harabim, as we're going to discuss, so the Gemara says, "Lav machshavto achi." That's not my intention. V'lo niskaima machshavto v'shari da. Filu chav le'isur mamashaka. Rabbi Shiziyah abahocha meidi yedia devade nafki v'lo times. What's very interesting? The chiluk over here between pouring out wastewater into, let's say, a body of water versus going into a cesspool is that when I pour it into a cesspool, my intention is that it stays in place. It gets absorbed into the ground right there and doesn't flow anywhere. When you pour the wastewater into a body of water, what by definition is going to happen? It's going to be taken somewhere else. Ikidamri. So we'll say, it's interesting, according to this version, the gustera, right, and with the mechitza allows you to draw water, but interestingly enough, doesn't allow you to dispose of wastewater. An alternate version, Ikidamri, Amra Ravuna, Lo tema lemalos udeshari lishbochaser. Don't think that the gustera with the mechitza only allows you to go ahead and draw water, but not to dispose of wastewater. Ella lishboch nami shari. The gustera allows you to go ahead and what? Dispose of wastewater as well. Both say so. In this version is the exact opposite. I'm going to have Shizvi Pshita. Shizvi says that's obvious. Hainu uka. This should be no different than a cesspool. To which the Gemara says, "Mahani taimi v'hani lo taimi." You might have thought the reason it's different than a cesspool is because the wastewater poured in a cesspool absorbs into the ground, versus this that doesn't absorb into the ground. Kamasha, that's not a chilek. And I will say that is indeed how the Shulchan Aruch paskins. That if you have one of these gustura mechitza set up, not only does it allow you to draw water, but it allows you to dispose of wastewater as well. Which I will say makes sense, because at the end of the day, what the opening in the gustra with the mechitza does is essentially converts the area of water right underneath that mechitza into irushas hayachid. So in reality, again, whether it's drawing water or disposing of water, you're really fine, because you're transferring an item from one rishus hayachid to another rishus hayachid. Good. So the Gemara goes weiter. So also remember again. So the Mishnah also said if you have two gustaros, two of these balconies, one on top of the other. In this case, you made the mechitza for the opening of the gustara in the upper balcony, but did not make anything in the lower balcony. They must join in an eruv together. And if they fail to join in an eruv together, both are aser. So says the Gemara, Amrav Huna, Amarav, when are they both aser? Lo shon ela b'smucha. That's only true where what? Where ultimately, again, the two balconies are within 4 tefachim of each other. Aval b'mufleges, but I will say if they are more than 4 tefachim away from each other, then elyona muteres. Then even if halacha l'maisa they did not join in an eruv, the upper balcony, which has the opening and the mechitza, is permitted to be used. The Rav l'tamei, and Abosei Rav goes according to his reasoning. Why? Damarav ein adam oser al chavero derech chaver. So we'll say we had this a few days ago. This is the famous shita of Rav, namely that when two people go ahead and share a common airspace, shared airspace does not aser one on the other. So both say, so again, assuming that so when do we say that they're joining an eruv together? That's when they're within 4 tefachim of each other. But if they're more than 4 tefachim apart, all they really have in common is common airspace, and the use of common airspace does not prohibit one on the other. So therefore, I'm going to both say if they don't make a joint eruv, the upper gustara will be able to use the opening with its mechitza because that's on its gustara, and of course the lower balcony will not be able to use anything. Amar Rabba, Amar Rav Yosef, Amar Rav Yoshia. It's interesting. Yesh gezel b'Shabbos. Well, so listen to this. There is theft on Shabbos. V'chorba machzir l'baylim, and a ruin goes back to its owner. So we'll say, what does this mean? It's actually quite fascinating. Look at Rashi. Yesh gezel b'Shabbos. It's about 5 lines before Rashi gets wide. Yesh gezel b'Shabbos v'chorba machzir l'baylim. Hashta sagadayt chadahakikam. This is what we assume it means as follows. Listen to this. Mutter ligzal b'Shabbos v'shuyos. You are permitted to. I'm going to translate the words. You're permitted to steal domains on Shabbos. Ulishamish ba b'chorbaso shel chaberas muchalo ki hechi diragel ba b'chol. Hoil ustam churva ein habaylim mishtamshin ba kolkach kani lehai b'gzelaso kishar gazlonim ve'anaasis rishuso v'churba machzir labaylim mashag al karcho iser Shabbos hazilabas. Listen to this, we'll say. Let's say during the week, Reuven happens to have a ruin that he does not use. He just doesn't use, and I do use it. I take it. So we'll say that's theft. Right, that's theft, right? Using someone's property without their permission is theft. But we'll say, interestingly enough, in the halachic view of theft, there's something called kinyane gzela. When you steal something, right, there's a certain level of acquisition. It sounds strange. A certain level of acquisition that a thief is able to affect. So we'll say, so now listen to this. So therefore, I would think like this: when the Mishnah says yesh gezel b'Shabbos, what that sounds like is as follows. Listen to this interesting case. So let's say the Reuven's ruin is right next to my house. During the week, I use this ruin all of the time. Granted, without Reuven's permission, all the time. Supposed to listen to this. Yesh gezel b'Shabbos. That phrase means that on Shabbos I don't have to enter into an eruv with Reuven regarding that chorva. Why not? Why not? Because essentially, since I use it, albeit illegally, during the week, L'maisa is like my domain. It's like my domain for Eruv purposes. It's like my Rishus, and I need not make another Eruv with Reuven over that chorb, which is really quite fascinating. So we'll say, so that's what it means, Yesh Gezel B'Shabbos. That if you stole something, essentially it becomes yours, L'gabe Eruv purposes on Shabbos. But I will say, now watch this. On the other hand, it says, But then Abba say it says that a ruin goes back to its original owner on Shabbos. To which the Gemara says that's a contradictory statement. Hagufakasha, Amrit Yesh Gezel b'Shabbos. First you say there is theft on Shabbos, which Shabbos means what? If I illegally use a particular property, it kiviyachol becomes mine, legabe eruv purposes, that I don't have to enter into an eruv with the owner, because since I use it, it's like it's mine. Amakanya. Therefore, again, to a certain degree, I acquire it. Now, when we say I acquire it, of course, it doesn't literally mean I acquire it. What it means is I acquire it in that I don't have to enter into an eruv with the actual owner. On the other hand, you say but then you say a ruin goes back to its owner for Shabbos. Alma lo kanya. But what that seems to mean is, even though I illegally use this chorva during the week, comes Shabbos, it becomes Reuven's property, and if I want to use it on Shabbos, I have to enter into an eruv with him. So which one is it? Hachagam means to say yesh din gezel b'Shabbos. It means the halachos of theft apply on Shabbos. How so? Ketzad the chorba machzer lebailim. That about say ruin goes back to its owner. So halacha l'maisa, the Gemara says that even if I illegally use Reuven's property throughout the week, I'm always using it. And both say Reuven never uses it. I'm always using it, albeit illegally. Comes Shabbos, we don't look. Interestingly enough, essentially the Gemara is saying is we don't look at the usage owner. We look at the titular owner, right? So who has title? Who has title? So we don't look at who uses it, who has title. And since Reuven has title, it's his, and therefore the Gabe Eruv purposes, I must make an Eruv with Reuven if I want to use that Churban Shabbos. Very interesting. Amar Rabba, and I will say we bring up a question based on this on our Mishnah. Supposed to remember again, we had the case, Mishnah had the case, ultimately again, of two gustaros, one above the other. So watch this. I will say again, if you're telling me that maybe the case over here is that the lower gustara always uses the opening in the upper gustara, and there's a din of gezel b'Shabbos, so therefore I will say really the two gustaros should not be obligated to enter into an eruv with each other, and therefore since the lower one always uses the opening of the upper one, should be able to continue to do so on Shabbos even without an eruv. What's the case? I both say the case over here is where they made the mechitza around the opening of the gustara b'shutfus. Rashi says sha'asu osa mechitza shalal yona b'shutfus. Ihachi kiasu l'tachtona nami. So I will say if that's the case, then at the end of the day, if halacha l'maisa they made an opening in the lower chatzar as well b'shutfus, it should be the same halacha. To which the Gemara says no. Kevan the asu l'tachtona. Once the lower gustara were to make an opening and a mechitza, or I should say, we're to make an opening and a mechitza around that opening in a lower gustara, gali daite da'ana bahadach lo nechale. So it's very interesting. Once they make an opening with a mechitza in the lower, once they make an opening around, once they make a mechitza around an opening and a mechitza around the opening in the lower gustara, that's essentially a declarative statement that what? That the lower gustara wants nothing to do with the upper gustara. Which also makes sense. The only time that the lower gustara accesses the opening and mechitza of the upper gustara is halacha l'maisa when it does not have one of its own. But if it has one of its own, then halacha l'maisa it essentially withdraws any level of ownership or any level of interest in the upper gustara. Good. So let's go back there. Says the Mishnah. A lot of interesting concepts here as well. But all right, we'll have to go back there. So the Gemara says as follows: Mishnah chatzar sheep pechusa me'arba amos. What's this interesting case? You have a chatzar, and we'll say now we're back to just a singular chatzar. You have a chatzar that is less than 4 amos in size. In shofchin b'soch hamayim b'Shabbos, you cannot pour wastewater into that chatzar on Shabbos. So we'll say, remember again, this is kind of a segueing a little bit we spoke about before. The Gemara brought up this idea, which is that the opening in the gustara with the mechitza only works to draw water, it doesn't work to dispose of water. Now, of course, we dispensed with that idea, and we said, no. The same way that the gustara with the mechitza allows you to draw water, it also allows you to dispose of wastewater. So we'll say now, we're in that topic now. So if I have a chatzar that is less than dalet ames in size, I cannot pour out wastewater into that chatzar on Shabbos. We'll see why that is in the Gemara. Ela imkein, asula uka machzekes sasayim min hanekev ulamata. Unless, of course, Rabbi say, unless of course I make an uka, right? Unless of course I make an uka is a cesspool. Unless of course I make a cesspool that holds at least 2 sa'ah of liquid min hanekev. Min hanekev ultimately again means like from the lip of the cesspool and down. Maybe mifnim. I will say this is true whether I made the uka, whether I made the cesspool inside the chutzner, outside of the chutzner. I'm sorry, tzarich likmor. I will say if you make a cesspool outside of the chutzner, and I was supposed to say when we say inside the chutzner means in the chutzner itself, outside the chutzner means in the Rishus Harabim, right next to the chutzner. So if you want to make the cesspool in the Rishus Harabim right outside of the chutzner, that's fine, but you must put boards over that cesspool. Now we'll see why that is. Rashi says over here, you must cover the opening of the cesspool with boards. So we'll say essentially we're going to see is as follows. The reason you could pour water into a cesspool, or wastewater into a cesspool, even if that cesspool ultimately again is in Rosh Hashanah, is because cesspool usually has dimensions of a makom p'tur, of an exempted area, which usually means that what? It's either less than 10, well, let's say it's 10 tefachim of height, but less than daled al daled. The concern is that if you have an open cesspool, what happens? So debris gathers, and as it settles in the cesspool, it diminishes the dimensions of the cesspool. And therefore, halacha l'maisa, when I end up pouring water into it, or wastewater into it, I may actually be transferring an item from Rosh Hashanah to Rosh Hashanah. So therefore, again, the way I take away that concern is it's a covered cesspool. So if you're building the cesspool in your own Rosh, we don't care about that. But if you're building Rosh Hashanah, it must have a cover. So the Gemara says, "Bifnim in tzarich likmar." But halacha l'maisa, if you're going to go ahead and build the cesspool in your chutzner, you don't have to go to make a cover. And also, you can see the picture of this is 311. You could see over here, right, the picture of the cesspool, right, which is a cutout in your balcony, right, or outside in the Rosh Hashanah, you see the boards on top of it. So the Mishnah goes on. He says, "Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov Omer biv shehu kamor arba amos Rosh Hashanah." So if you have a biv. Biv, we'll say, is a drainage channel, right? Or drainage ditch. So you have a biv that is kamor means covered. A covered biv, a covered drainage channel. So the Gemara says, Arba amos Rosh Hashanah. So we'll say, so if you have, so again, a covered drainage channel in Rosh Hashanah, if it is daled amos, shofchim l'socha mayim b'Shabbos. You could pour water into it on Shabbos. The Chacham say, afilu gag o chatzar mea amma. Even if you have a rooftop or a chatzar that has 100 amos, lo yishboch al pi habiv. You should not go ahead and pour the water directly into the drainage channel. Aval shofechu legag, but rather you could pour the wastewater on the roof. V'amayim yardin lebiv, and that way the water will flow into the drainage channel. You shouldn't pour directly into it. Rashi says over here, Lo yishbach al pi abiv, kolomar besoch acharis, va'af al pi sheish orech mikan, ayutz yasam mea ama, v'yichon livla, kevon de begufei kashavech mekalchi lehedra. So we'll say the issue over here is since the drainage ditch flows into the Rosh Hashanah, we don't want you pouring wastewater directly into a channel that is definitely going to go into Rosh Hashanah. So therefore, what we'd rather you do is pour the wastewater on a different surface, even though that surface will ultimately drain into the drainage channel itself. The Gemara says, "V'mayim yardin lebiv, hachatzer v'achsadra." Both the chatzar and the achsadra, mitzvah from the arba amos. So this goes back to the original halacha, right? The original halacha is if you have a chatzar that is less than daled amos, you can't pour wastewater into that chatzar unless, of course, you have a cesspool. So the Mishnah just says, for that daled amos, the chatzar and the achsadra could combine together. V'chein shnei diotos zu kineged zu. So Torah will say if you have two apartments, upper story apartments, opposite each other, mikzasan asu uka, mikzasan lo asu uka. One of them made a cesspool, one of them didn't make a cesspool. Esha asu uka mutarin, esha lo asu uka asurin. The ones who made the cesspool will be mutar. The ones who did not will be asur for pouring out their wastewater. Good. Let's analyze. My time. So both say, let's start from the beginning of the Mishnah. The beginning of the Mishnah said that you have a chatzar that is less than daled amos. You can't pour wastewater in the chatzar itself. Right? You have to create a cesspool. Why? What's the problem here? Why can't I pour out wastewater in a chatzar even if it doesn't daled amos? To which the Gemara says, "My time aram misha adam asui listapek sasaim sa'ah b'chol yom." Because we'll say a person normally uses 2 sa'ah of water a day. Ba'arba amos adam rotzel alpha. Supposed to listen to this. If you have, say, if you normally use about 2 sa of water a day, and you have an area of dalet amos or more, supposed to remember again, in the age of dirt floors, people would often go ahead and sprinkle water on the floor to keep the dust down. So if your normal usage of water is 2 sa'ah a day, then halacha l'maisa, that's an easy amount of water to contain and maintain in the chutzner, because you would be using it anyway to keep the dust down on the floor. Pachos midalet amad beis. But if again, I will say if you have a chutzner that's less than dalet amas, the Gemara says shofchan, so you can pour it ida avid uka shari ilo aser. So we'll say again, less than dalet amas, you don't have the requisite area to maintain the water to keep down the dust. As opposed to there's nowhere for that water to go. So because there's nowhere for that water to go, therefore halacha l'maisa there's a concern that it'll flow directly into the surabim, and therefore halacha l'maisa you have to make a cesspool. Rab Zera says dalet amos taimi pachus dalet amos. So we'll say so according to the first opinion, according to Rabbah, the reason why, if you have a chutzner of dalet amos or more that you could pour the wastewater directly into the chutzner, you don't need a cesspool, is because that's the amount of water, normal usage a day, and you can utilize that water to keep the dust down on the ground. Less than that, the water has nowhere to go, it's going to flow into the shram, therefore you need a cesspool. Rabbi Zera says no. Rabbi Zera says it's simpler. If you have an area of dalet amos of ground, of earth, could absorb 2 sa'ah of water. Less than dalet amos, right? Pachos mi dalet amos lo taimi, cannot go ahead and absorb that amount of water, and because it can't absorb, it'll flow directly to the shram. So I'll say the concern over here is pouring water in a way where the water will inevitably flow into the Rishus Harabim. So the Gemara is saying, Mishnah said, more than dalet amos, we're confident that the water remains in the chutzner. Less than dalet amos, the water is going to flow out. Therefore, you need a dedicated cesspool. So why does dalet amos work? So Rabbi says dalet amos works because again, that's the amount of water, normal usage, and you would use that type of water anyway to keep the dust down on the ground. Rabbi Zera, 4 amos or more, the earth itself could absorb 2 sa of water. Less than dalet amos, it can't absorb the water will flow out. So Gemara says, my bad, what's the nafkamina between them? Amrabai arich v'katin. An interesting nafkamina would be, let's say instead of 4x4, you have 8x2, right? So we'll see you have a longer area. So in other words, you still have the same technical dalet amos, but lamaisa, it's not in a way that ultimately again. So technically, that area could absorb the water, but that's not the type of usable area that you would be sprinkling with water in order to keep the dust down. So good, fine. Tanan, chatzar v'achsadra mistafel and dalet amos. We'll also remember again, the Mishnah said that a chatzar and achsadra could combine for the dalet amos shear. Bishon the Rabbi Zera necha. So we'll say according to Rabbi Zera, this makes sense. El Rabba kasha. We'll say according to Rabba, how does this work? Because we'll also remember again, according to Rabbi Zera, this is a din in absorption. So as long as you have dalet amos of, what do they call it? What's the term when the earth absorbs the water? We have this with stormwater management. What do they call it? Absorption. Okay. No, you have to have a certain amount of pervious, right? Pervious and non-pervious, right? So ultimately, again, so if I both say as long as it's pervious, right? As long as it's pervious, then halacha l'maaseh accomplishes the thing. So again, therefore the chatzar and achsadra could go ahead and combine with each other. However, the Gemara says l'Rabba kasha. Also according to Rabbah, ultimately again, this wouldn't really be the type of area that you would sprinkle with water to keep the dust down. So Tergam Rabbi Zera aliba de Rabbah achsadra ma'alechas apika lachatzer kula. So also therefore Rabbi Zera says, what's the case according to Rabbah? It's an achsadra that spreads out amongst the entire chatzar. Tashma chatzar she'in ba dalet amos al dalet amos ein shovchin l'socha mayim b'Shabbos. What's the Rishonim Brayso? That if you have a chatzar that doesn't have dalet amos al dalet amos, you can't pour water into it on Shabbos. Bishom the Rabba necha. But according to Rabbah, this makes sense. El Rabbi Zera kash. Rabbi Zera will say, this is problematic. Rabbi Zera hamani rabbanon. We'll say, whose opinion does this reflect? It reflects the view of the Rabbanon. Umas nizin Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakovi. But the Mishnah itself reflects the view of Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov. Amai duchke. The Rabbi Zera lo ukmin lamas nizin Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov. And I will say, why is it? What is it that pushed Rabbi Zera to establish the Mishnah like Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov? Amar Rabbi Masnisi kashisa. Because the Mishnah was problematic. What was difficult to the Mishnah? My area the tani chatzar shehi pechusa. Why does it have to mention a chatzar that is less than dalet amos? Listni chatzar she'ein ba dalid al dalid amos. Why doesn't it just say a chatzar that doesn't have dalid al dalid? Ella lav shmamina Rabbi Elazar ben Yaakov yishmamina. So rather, again, the fact that the Mishnah worded it in that way clearly indicates that it's reflecting the view of Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov. I have a hami the sefer Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov, Rachel Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov. But if the sefer is Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov, the Reisha can't be Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov. Or I should say, again, the fact that we're saying that the sefer is Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov would seem to indicate that the Reisha reflects the view of a different opinion, to which the Gemara says no. Rather, Kul Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov. The entire Mishnah reflects the view of Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov. The Mishnah is missing a piece, and here's how you have to read it. If you have a chatzar that is less than dalet amas, first word line above say, Ein shofchin l'soch hamayim b'Shabbos. You can't pour water into that chatzar on Shabbos. Had dalet amos, I will say if the chatzar is exactly dalet amas, then what? Shofchin. You can't pour wastewater into that chatzar, even without a cesspool. Why? Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov Omer, Biv HaKamer Dalet Amos Rabim, Shofchin L'soch Hamayim B'Shabbos. So Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov says that if you have a drainage dish that is Dalet Amos, even if it's in Rosh Hashanah, as long as it is covered, you could pour water directly into it on Shabbos. Good. So also now let's analyze that piece. Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov Omer, Biv HaKamer. So also remember again, if you have a covered drainage dish that is in Rosh Hashanah, so the halacha is Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov says you could pour water into it. Masizin lo k'chananya. So also our Mishnah does not reflect the view of Hananya. Why? What did Hananya say? The Sanya, Hananya says, Afilu gag mea ama lo yishboch. Say even if you have a gag, a rooftop that is 100 amas, you still shouldn't pour water onto that rooftop, knowing that it's going to flow into the drainage ditch. Because I will say ultimately again, everyone knows the roof won't absorb. The roof will just channel the water into the drainage ditch, and it's the equivalent, pouring it onto the roof is the equivalent of pouring it directly into the drainage ditch. So Tana, so the Gemara says, when do you require an uka? When do you require an uka? B'mosach. This is very interesting. So now we're going to get, this describes a little bit of like the usage of their chaseros. So when do you require an uka? When do you require a cesspool? So the Gemara says, b'mosach chama, only during the summer. Aval b'mosach geshamim, but I will say during the winter, shofech v'shona ve'enon. So you could pour out as much wastewater as you want. Now we'll say, so what's the logic? The logic was that during the winter anyway, everything is muddy. Everything is muddy. So the truth is, again, everything is muddy and everything is ruined. So therefore, it didn't really matter where you poured the wastewater. My time, Amarava, Adam wrote shivlu ma'imim koman, because a person desires that when they pour out wastewater, it gets absorbed in the space where you pour it out. Amalei Abaye, Vari Shovchen, the Adam wrote shivlu. So also when it comes to wastewater, a person desires that the wastewater become absorbed where it is. V'katani lo yishboch, and yet again the Mishnah says you shouldn't pour it out in an area of less than dalet al dalet. Amalei hasam l'may nechosh. What are we concerned about? Imishum kilkol chatzero. If we're concerned that pouring out the wastewater in your chatz is going to ruin the chatzar, hamakalkal of a kaimer. If we're referring to the rainy season, anyway the chatzar is messed up. The imishum gezera shema yomru tzinoro shalponi mekalech mayim. And I will say if you're concerned that if you pour it into the cesspool or into the drainage dish and there's runoff from a pipe into Rosh Hashanah, people are going to say, oh, Ploni is pouring wastewater directly into Rosh Hashanah. Ultimately, again, stam tzinoros mekalchim hein. We'll say in general, when you have a runoff pipe, everyone expects that during the winter, there's going to be water running from that runoff pipe into Rosh Hashanah and nothing to do with you pouring anything. That's just a function of the rain accumulating during the rainy season. So Rav Nachman says as follows. During the winter time, if you have a cesspool that could hold 2 saw of water, 2 saw of liquid, so the Gemara says, you could fill it up with 2 saw. You could fill it with up to 2 saw of liquid. Machzik saw, if it only holds 1 saw. No saw, then you can put in 1 saw of wastewater. B'mosachama during the summertime, machzik sasayim, if the cesspool holds 2 saw of liquid. No sasayim, you can put in 2 saw of liquid. Saw, but if during the summertime it only holds 1 saw, ein no kolikir, you can't put anything into the cesspool. I don't understand why is that during the summertime, if the cesspool holds 1 saw, why can't I put in 1 saw of liquid? Gezerah dilma asi litin lasasayim, out of a concern that you may come to overflow the cesspool. So I don't understand. If you're concerned about overflowing the cesspool during the summer, why not be concerned about that during the winter as well? To which the Gemara says, no. Hasa my nechoshla. Both said there's no concern with overflowing the cesspool. Why not? So the Gemara says, imishum kilkul, because if you're concerned that overflowing the cesspool is going to ruin the chutzar, that's not a concern during the winter. Why not? The chutzar is already ruined during the winter. Everything is muddy anyway. Hamakal klavakaimo. Imishum gezerah, and if you want to say that it's because of a gezerah, shamayom rutinor shalploni mekala mayim, if you want to say it's a concern that if you overflow the cesspool during the winter, what's going to happen? There's going to be that overflow pipe, and that's going to be flowing water into the shram. People are going to say, oh, what do they call it? What's the overflow called? No, there's a name for it. They're going to say you're sheeting water, right, into the Rosh Hashanah. Right? Isn't that the right term? No? Right, but you could be sheeting water. Whatever. Okay, good. Right, fine. It just sounded good. It sounds like so the Gemara says as follows. So if you're concerned that ultimately, again, the overflow water is going to be flooding the Rosh Hashanah afterwards, to which the Gemara says, again, remember, during the winter anyway, stam tzinoros makalkin. But I just want to point out, just so you understand, this entire discussion is only, again, remember, d'rabbanans, because technically speaking, once you're pouring it out into your drainage ditch or into your cesspool, there's really no halachic problem anymore. The concern over here is what it looks like. So the concern now is if you overflow your cesspool and people see water sheeting from your property, I'm going to use it, right, into the Rosh Hashanah, then a halach l'maisa looks like you're pouring water directly into the Rosh Hashanah. Tushik Gemara says during the summertime anyway, that's not a concern. Why? Because during the summertime anyway, there's water flowing everywhere. And I will say, even if you do nothing, it's quite possible that there's water sheeting from your property into the Rosh Hashanah regardless, because halacha l'maisa is just a rain flow. Therefore, the Gemara says, Hilchach, Amar Abaye Hilchach, Afilu Kar, Afilu Kurayim. Therefore, both say, interestingly enough, Abaye said, both say this indeed is the halacha, that during the rainy season, the truth is you can pour as much water as you want into your cesspool. Why? Because we'll say during the rainy season, the assumption is anyway, there's going to be water flowing and sheeting from your property into the Rosh Hashanah. So it doesn't make any difference. So Lamaisa, again, interestingly enough, it's during the summer. It's really quite fascinating. It also just gives you an insight as to how they lived. During the summer times, when you have to be careful with how much you are filling your cesspool, because then you have to be concerned that overflowing it will cause water to flow from your cesspool to Rosh Hashanah. People will think that you are directly pouring water from your Rishos into Rosh Hashanah, or directly pouring water into Rosh Hashanah. But during the summertime, when anyway everything is watery and muddy and ruined, you could even overflow your cesspool on Shabbos, and it's no problem. I'll say just very quickly, let's finish the parak. So we'll say if you have two upper stories opposite each other, even if they went ahead and they made an eruv together. So the Gemara says, again, remember the Mishnah said the one who made a cesspool could pour out his water, the one who didn't make a cesspool can't pour out his water. What's the reason? Rashi says, afilu ervu shtei aliyos telekela mechash. Actually, I will say, well, all right, we'll have to stop over here. You know what? Let's just finish it. So the Gemara says, "Afilu ervu." Amar Abaye, my time. So we'll say, even if they made an eruv together, still the halacha follows. What's the reason for this? Ilema mishum nefisha demayo. If you want to say because there's a lot of wastewater, v'atanya achas li ukav achas li gistira breicha v'areva afa pishnes malumayim be'erev Shabbos shokun l'socha mayim b'Shabbos. We'll say, in general, we see that when it comes to a cesspool, even if it's already filled, you could still pour more water into it, and we're not concerned about overflowing. Rather, ultimately, again, if this is what you have to say, Amar Rava says, top of Peites, Lo Shana Elo Shalo Irvu. We'll say, ultimately, again, it's only true if the two upper stories did not make a joint eruv. Then what's the halacha? Then they can't go ahead and pour the water into the chutzner. Aval irvu. But I will say if the two upper stories made an eruv, then they are permitted to pour wastewater into the chutzner. The chi lo irvu, and if they didn't make a joint eruv, why can't they pour water into the chutzner? My time lo. Amravashi. Gezerah dilma asi la'afuke mimani debatim lahasam. But I'll say interestingly enough, so if they made a joint eruv, then they could pour wastewater into the chutzner. If they did not make a joint eruv, they cannot pour wastewater into the chutzner. What's the concern? Because we'll say if they did make an eruv, the concern then is that they will carry utensils from their homes into the chutzner to pour water out into the cesspool, and without an eruv, that would be a problem of carrying from a home into a joint chutzner. Hadran Allah, Ketzar Mishtatan, I will say Shkoyach. Tomorrow we begin the new parak.